So I'm going to give you the short version of my biography. I've done everything you can lose money at. I've been a musician, a writer, an architect. I studied semiology, linguistics. I could go on, but it gets sad. I am blessed to have a partner in Joy Harjo, who studied comparative literature. And many of the things that you're going to see today, she sort of keeps me honest on. So, Tongore Brook Site, we're going to talk about today the overlapping of archaeological and cultural traditions on the site. I'll show you where it is in a minute. There's an assumption here that I should mention I did a lot of work on the site with Glenn Kreisberg and also Todd Flagler and a lot of other people from near. So thank you all. It's my first time here. It's an honor. There's an assumption on this site that there are three worlds. There's an underground world that deals with 9 concentrated flows, that basically underground water. They, based on well construction in the area, that could be anywhere from 300 to 1,000 feet deep. Dr. Johnson visited the site several times over 3 years, and we were able to map 9 of these deep concentrated flows. The other one is the surface world, which is on the far right, and those are mapped stone cairns, and they correlate roughly to either Orion and inverted Orion, or what in Algonquin cultures they call Wintermaker, which is Orion with a couple of bonuses. So our Orion, Greek-Roman tradition does this, and Wintermaker does this, picks up a couple of other stars from other, that we call other constellations. Wintermaker arises round about what the Irish call Samhain, or we call Halloween. That's the last day, generally, annually, you have 10 hours of light. You can't plant anymore, you got to switch to hunting. Wintermaker rises directly over the Wintermaker constellation on November 1st. It's really something to see. So the presentation, I'm just going to read it off here. Presentation is based on a survey of the Esopus people's upland sacred ceremonial stone landscape, Stone Ridge, New York, conducted from 2023 to basically yesterday, in collaboration with a team headed by Dr. David Johnson with substantial assistance from NERA. It maps and correlates deep concentrated flows, stone surface features, and celestial alignments in an archaeological and cultural context through the eye of an architect. That's me, who has had the privilege of living on, studying, and interacting with the site for 25 years. Most of that work that I put in has been over the past 4 or 5 years, but I've been there for, I guess, what, quarter century, so it's been an interesting ride. I want to point out here, see that this will better work. Okay, that's the site. That's the Ashokan Reservoir. That's Ashokan High Point. And that is where Glenn Kreisberg hangs out over the pump. We'll come back to that later. That'll be a fun surprise if you can make it through. Okay, so this is a sort of AI generated Wikipedia type definition of a sacred ceremonial stone landscape. You probably all get it. They're a collection of stone structures with a specific landscape, considered sacred by Indigenous peoples and those who respect the site. These structures typically include stone walls, cairns, and walls that were assembled or altered by humans, cultural alterations sometimes called, and are believed to have been used for ceremonial and other purposes. So this was done by Todd Flagler. This is the largest cairn on, okay, this is 5 years of work. This is the site here. All these different arrows, and I'll call some of these out later in details. Every one of these little dots or squares or symbols, they represent, I think last count was 36 different cairns or significant walls or other stone features on the site. This is a cross section that Todd photographed with a drone, and then I pieced it together. These are the 3 belt stars of Orion or Wintermaker, and they are round about in here. So more on that later. Okay, here we go. So here are the three belt stars. Anarak is over here. He's a little guy. Turtle. Analam in the middle. Turtle. Turtle. This turtle is facing due south. And thank you, Evan Pritchard, for pointing this out to me. And this guy is on the equinox. Now, I think that's a flipper, because one of the things that's supposed to be distinctive about Native American forms is that they're often buried deep in the ground. They're violin stones, for example, and they're sort of carved into violin shapes, and you can't move them. They're really deep, deep in the ground. A lot of the walls are also a couple of feet in the ground. So anyway, this is, there you go. There's a head, and there's a flipper. This guy is about 90 degrees to this guy. He's over here. So he's on Turtle Island, and this Turtle Island, and he's headed off to the equinox, and he's headed due south. I should point out that almost every large outcropping, whether constructed or glacial, faces due north south. Almost all of them have been culturally altered into sort of diamond-shaped or compass-shaped forms. It took me a couple of years to notice that. You're looking at it, you see one thing, and then once you see it, you can't unsee it, and you keep finding more and more and more. So this is a site that is sort of obsessed with north-south alignments. Although our computer scientist friend might say they're randomized. Okay. Now, there are many other stars at the site. There's our good friend Betelgeuse, and there's Rigel and Saiph. They're at various points. Now, one of the things I really like about this photograph is this is probably how the natives saw the skies. Right? So when we look at the skies, because of everything from industrial pollution to light pollution to Mr. Musk satellites, we can't see a damn thing compared to what they saw. So this was taken at Big Bend in Texas. That's what the night sky looks like. So here you can see Orion and Rigel over here. That's Betelgeuse, so he's hanging out over there. I think this is one of the arms of the Wintermaker over here, and there's another one way the heck over here. Not quite at the door, but kind of over there. So, it occurs to me, maybe to you, how profoundly confusing and confounding looking up at the sky must have been. And everything came from the sky, the weather, the sun, the ability to grow, the seasons. And so there must have been this extraordinary desire to bring order to things, right? I mean, it's full of both terror and wonder, right? I mean, there used to be people who would come across the southern place of Germany, and they would see the Alps and they would drop dead out of fear. I mean, nature was a fearsome thing. To people even in the Middle Ages who had the benefit of Christianity as a bulwark, a belief system to take away the terror. So most cultures confront nature with a sense of terror, and then eventually, as they bring order to it, respect, right? And these people are profoundly connected to nature because they evolved over thousands of years, a balanced system in which they and nature could coexist. And that's culture, right? So we're talking about archaeology here, also talking about culture at every turn. So it's really, interesting for me to be able to point to that photograph and say, that's what they saw. Okay, so this is how we map it and figure it out, right? We have names from all. These are all done with telescopes. And so that's sort of our version of the sky. We saw theirs. This is the landscape the Paleo Indians would have actually confronted. This is a glacial eccentric after the retreat of a glacier in Antarctica. But 12 to 15,000 years ago in the Hudson Valley, that's what the landscape looked like, right? So you've got the stars up there in the sky, scaring the living heck out of you. And this is what you see on the ground. So there's a natural tendency, I think, to try to make order of things, right? To connect them. Evan Pritchard told me that in native cultures, they tend to find things and then they try to bring order to them. They don't necessarily construct them or force an order onto them. They like to discover order and try to correlate it with other things. So of those three stars that I showed you in the belt star, two are glacial outcroppings, one is constructed. The largest one that's constructed is 30 feet by 40 feet. It's 3.5 feet high, has all sorts of interesting things about it. I'll tell you about in a minute. It faces north-south, and it seems to have a tortoise head guiding itself, just like the middle star. Okay, so I'm speculating, and it is speculative and respectfully so, that these landscapes are landscapes of both spirituality and meaning, right? Their archaeology and their culture. So this is the map I showed you. This is the sort of key, right? The assumption is that this is a Wintermaker site, and here she is down here, and as you wish. And these are the 9 flows that Dr. Johnson charted. Now, this map correlates. It's hard to see here, I realize, but if you look carefully, you can see them. These flows, in many instances, align with, directly over, or in meaningful ways cross at points that correlate both the flows underground and the stone formations on the map. This is north-south, generally southeasterly and generally northwesterly Winter Solstice Dawn Wall. There are other walls within the constellation here that correlate to all sorts of different alignments, equinox alignments, lunar alignments. I'll show you those. And this one's a fun one. This is the one that points to Glenn's site up in Woodstock. Okay, so as an architect, I'm trained to look at things a certain way. Also, as someone who studied, poetry, literature, linguistics, semiology, I'm trained to look for the intentionality on what goes on in any object, in any cultural object, right? Whether it's a word, the etymology of a word, whether it's a stone building, or whether it's a painting. So I'm going to show you something that I thought would be interesting, which is the Cathedral of Notre Dame de Chartres in Chartres, France. And the reason I like it is that it's so completely different from what we seem to be talking about here that you have to be astounded by the similarities. This is the famous labyrinth on the floor as you walk through the doors of Chartres Cathedral. Now, to this labyrinth is attributed so many things, it'll just knock your socks off. It's the life of Christ. It's about Mary, the mother of Christ in Christian belief systems. Here also, it's a journey from different aspects of the stars into the center. Aries happens to be the center for whatever reason, which is salvation. You'll also notice this interesting overlapping of symbols. For example, this is a cross. See it here? There's a cross organizing. Now, you can walk it. You can walk it either with the idea that you're following these astrological journeys, and they take you to the center, which is a meaningful place, obviously. But it also correlates to, depending on who you're reading, different aspects of the spiritual journey to redemption through understanding Christ and his messages and so forth. There's easily a dozen different meanings that have been attributed. And this, by the way, has been repeated all over the world. There's one at NYU in Lower Manhattan. Okay, so here's the cathedral, and these are its flying buttresses. There are other things about it that are interesting. So intent is what makes Chartres' flying buttresses different from a pile of rocks. Master masons, the masons, interwove spiritual belief and built form, a deliberate and purposeful mental state and its mental and its physical manifestation. Its fine buttresses, and there they are. Its fine buttresses dance against the sky, rendering the mystery of God's infinite power manifest in gravity-defying stone. They want to plan to evidence the mystical cruciform body of Christ at this sacred site of 5 prior cathedrals going all the way back to the Romans. Okay, so this church is thousands of years old. There was a big fire around 1200, and it was rebuilt in just 30 years. It's considered one of the real marvels of architecture in the world. Take a little bit closer look at it. So this is one of the buttresses, and I don't know if you know about this, but in the buttresses of a cathedral, any building, it's the same amount of stone, whether you make it one big blob or whether you blow it up into this dance against the sky. This is a 19th century architect, Vesta Asteroid Wall. He's trying to figure out how the invisible forms that go through stone can make the cathedral stand up. So remember, this is a journey toward Christian God, right? So they're trying to make manifest things that are invisible. That's incredibly important to understand any cultural manifestation of spirituality, right? Any religious building, right? Any religious artifact. They're trying to make manifest something invisible. Okay, now the result, here's your plan, sort of a cross, a little bit messed up here and there. We call this a disturbed symmetry. That's because it was built over many, many years. But the cruciform comes through. This is the ceiling here. And these rose windows are used to teach, because in this building, the religious form is also tied to functionality. Many of the people who are illiterate, the only type of story or culture that they experience was the Bible, the Gospels, and so forth. So these windows are teaching tools. Stone teaching tools. Stone arranged in such a way that light, the light of dawn, can enter over the altar, right, and celebrate the bringing of light to the world through Christian teaching. This is also interesting, and I'm going to turn to our buddy, the computer scientist. Do these folks know how to make statues that look like well-proportioned human beings? Yeah, they do. Look at their faces. Their faces are human faces. The reason they're elongated like that is why they're aspiring to the celestial, right? They're elongated to go up to the sky, to the spirit. Remember, we just talked about the underground water, and then we have the surface world, and then we have the sky. Well, here the sky and its light represent a kind of spiritual salvation, right? So you have all these different things that are overlapping. It's also very, very important. The idea that meaning can overlap in a cultural object. Okay, now I'm going to go back to our circuit wall from here. This is on the property, and this is the one that goes up to Glenn's right here. So we're here, and this is Glen up there, and there's an absolute alignment between this circuit wall on my property and the circuit area where Glen is on Overlook Mountain. By the way, this little star here is occasionally the North Star. I don't know if you know that. We're alive in our lifetimes. Polaris is the North Star, but it switches, right? So this would have been pointing possibly to their North Star. Now, this is it in winter. A lot of architecture uses what's called chiaroscuro, which is contrasting light and dark. And a lot of these sites, if you go in the winter in a light snow, you'll see that circuit heads and other features are a lot more visible. This occurs in Spanish, and especially Spanish colonial architecture. It's deliberate light and shadow. So anybody who's looking at a site, go in the winter, see what you can see. Okay, that's enough on that one, I think. Well, except, look, they built a wall. Oh, one more thing, kind of interesting. One of Dr. Johnson's flows goes right through here, right? Now you'll notice this is a very carefully coursed wall. when you lay out stones in wall, you do them either regularly or irregularly or something in between. These are very, very carefully coursed. I have walls on my site that are only one stone thick, and you can see light through at very specific times of the year. That's exactly where the snake's heart is. I don't know, coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. So they're trying to express something that's invisible, right? That has a cultural and spiritual meaning, much like the people on another continent thousands of years later did. Okay, now here's the winter solstice. Our good friend Pleiades, however you prefer, they're down here hanging out. And then all along this wall, it's very, very heavily featured. And it goes up and bumps into a ridge. We're at about 800 or 900 feet. The top of that is 1100. So the ridge kind of makes a very sharp turn upward here and keeps going. But along here, there are violin stones and lace walls. There's a sun watcher seat. If you sit here during the winter solstice dawn, we're right in alignment with the sunrise. This is little Tongore Brook. Tongore Brook crosses the wall up here near this at 90 degrees. And, you know, there are a couple of features on that wall. Now, interestingly, the wall, this is Dr. Johnson's work. He charted that wall on Google Earth, and he charted it at the solstice. You can see that it's up here. This is where the sun is at the dawn on the first day of winter. Actually, you see it from here. It goes up. This would be in summer where it sets. It goes right there to the top of High Point Mountain. High Point Mountain is in the exact same alignment as that wall, right? So the wall isn't only marking the solstice, actually. It's also noted all the way up the ridge with additional stones, as if the sun is going through the ridge, right? They sort of had that notion that the sun, somehow its energy could go through the ridge of the mountain, which is the highest point in the area. So there's another wall. Took me a long time to find this one. It's called I call it the Vesta. Vesta is the brightest asteroid in the sky. It's brighter than the moon when you see it. And it has this really, really curious set of circumstances around it. So the wall is 450 feet long. It aligns with Vesta at very specific times of the year. The thing about Vesta is that, unlike a lot of the other walls, what we've been talking about in general, is it's a lunar alignment. Spoken to a lot of Native Americans, so Dr. Johnson, he pointed this out to me. A lot of Native people say, we don't care about the sun, we care about the moon. It's really what interests us. So Vesta appears every 17 months. By the way, yesterday it was at its brightest in our area. It's at the full moon opposition every 3.6 years. It's seen at the winter solstice every 18 years. It's seen at the lunar standstill, lunastice, if you don't know about those, they're fun. On the winter solstice every 18.6 years, and even more rarely, it's at a lunar standstill full moon at winter solstice, and it frequently appears in Wintermaker. That one happens to be it in the Wintermaker or Orion areas up there. Okay. All along that wall, there are these curious little altars, and they all face the first light of dawn on the winter solstice. So they're like light catchers, right? All along the wall. Okay. There are Equinox Cairns. If you're charting Equinox, this is the little baby turtle's cairn. And it's hard to see. That's the sunrise right there on the Equinox. And there are other markers along the way. Many large cairns. This is a disturbed cairn. And they end up in the Pleiades. Okay, they're all charted here. Each one of these little marks along the way. Kind of fun. This one's a real killer. One of the stars in Orion, right up here, or Wintermaker, right shoulder, right there, Bellatrix. On the equinox alignment, a star in the Wintermaker, the stone feature is also a confluence of two deep concentrated flows, underground, two rivers, if you will, that intersect underneath this particular feature. It also makes a sharp turn. There's a wall here, and there's a flow coming down here, and that flow side goes down, it keeps going on. There's another flow here, flow one. So this is within the constellation. It's the upper right shoulder. Here it is. It's unlike anything I've ever seen except one other place that I'm going to show you in a second. It's rocks that are flat, stones rather, that are flat. That's 1 meter. And they're symmetrical. They're propped up with stones underneath them, generally 3 piles of 3. And those stones are set at an angle, so they're going down, so they should collapse. They're like I call them anti-gravity stones. I've seen them on other locations, but they should slide down, but they don't. So they knew how to figured out how to. So 2 large flat mirrored stones propped downward on sloped rocks with space amid them and surrounded and with a rounded stone between them. This to me looks almost moon-like with an ovary in the middle. I'll show you the top in a second. Okay, so here it is again. See, so there's a rounded stone there. These look, labial, womb-like. You pick. Seems to have a feminine aspect to it. Back here, on this side, is a crescent, quite large. And the only other place I saw this was in the film that you saw last night that I bought because I was so fascinated by it. And this is on Parsons Island. As you learned last night, this was sticking out of the exposed sand and clay edge of the island down here. And look, very similar form to these. Yeah. One may be gone. And how many rocks supported? 1, 2, 3. This one's in Maryland. It's the only one I've seen published anywhere that looked anything like what I saw on my site. Okay, so just want to talk briefly about the post-Indigenous settlement on the site. The site, perhaps occupied by, we've now learned, thousands, tens of thousands of years by Paleo, then Esopus Algonquin-speaking Indigenous peoples, was abandoned in 1665 under a treaty ending it was actually Dutch Esopus force, but the English stepped in and there was a treaty. They told the Esopus, you can stay, you can go, but you can't fight anymore. We'll give you a lot of money if you leave. So the site was reoccupied and settled by American officer Ralph Trowbridge in 1795. The thing about him is his family had deep, deep ties with the culture of the Indigenous people. One of his cousins, Charles Trowbridge, translated several English books into Indigenous languages and recorded. It's my understanding. He recorded oral tradition into English. He was head of Bureau of Indian Affairs in the Midwest out of Detroit, and one family, all from the same place in Connecticut. I believe that one of the reasons the site is kept so well for so many centuries, or maybe thousands of years, is that after its abandonment, within a fairly short period of time, Trowbridge moved there, and his family knew their languages. He had fought with Native peoples during the French and Indian Wars, and someone might have said to him, when you're farming, don't disturb these features. Take care of them, and don't cannibalize them when you're making your settlement walls. Now, I knew the last Trowbridge. He actually helped me build my house on that piece. So Trowbridges had been there since 1790. Now, I suspect they may have helped preserve or at least not disturb the features that are there. Also, there are logging roads all throughout that area, because of course, that part of the Catskills from clear cut. No logging roads on this side. If one side over, yes. A few hundred yards on the other way, yes. No logging roads anywhere on that side. Also, it's never been hunted. Also, it's a headwaters. To this day, there are bear, mating eagles, deer, any kind of wildlife you can find anywhere in the Catskills. They're in and around the Tongore Brook, the sacred headwaters that feed the Esopus Creek, that in turn feeds the Hudson and goes to the ocean. Okay, so I'm just saying, you know, what I said. Here's a map. The Esopus are here. Parsons Island is down around here, so it's not impossible. There could have been cultural communication either over land or along the water here, over who knows how many years. Okay, this is something I bumped into. I thought I want to share with you. Talking sometimes about whether something aligns precisely or doesn't align precisely, whether there are random or predictable or non-predictable patterns, whether you can include or exclude certain things when you're looking at this site. I studied linguistics for a while, poetry, and I want to point out that Indigenous people, particularly Algonquin people, they have a very different notion of what a noun is. Okay, they don't necessarily follow what we think of as a noun thing. Okay, they think that things are noun, meaning they're kind of a verb and kind of a noun. So this is kind of a pad of paper, but it's kind of becoming and not becoming a pad of paper. It's noun. What does that correlate to? Quantum physics. Quantum physics states that 1 million times a second, this pad of paper, you and I, everybody around us, every tree, every leaf, this building, go in and out of this universe. We are 1 million times a second. That's science. So it's curious to me that their language welcomes ambiguity, well refuses the idea that a thing is a thing is a thing. They believe it's a process. And that's baked into the language as an assumption. It's kind of a vibey thing, you know. Therefore, and this is the great pyramid, 30 by 40, true north-south. There's a prayer way here. There's a prayer way here. There's a prayer way here. There are 3 large boulders here making a turtle head. There's a little tail on the spot. True north, south, east, west. The water comes here, keeps going over to the other 2 belt stars over here. And there's a depressed center. And during certain times of the year, whether it's snowing or under firelight, you can see there are also 3 rings in here in the depressed center. 3 prairways, right? And 3 rings on the inside. And there's a lot of triple layering that you see in the chiaroscuro tradition, either under snow or under firelight, certain types of sunlight, certain types of the year. I am interested in the idea that multiple meanings and contradictory readings are part of these sites, because it's baked into their language. So the device of layered and multiple meanings, often contradictory readings, here and throughout the history of art, everywhere, often points to the artist's acknowledgement of the ultimate unknowingness of the universe and our place in it. The great cairn at this site is a single stone feature, but also 3 spirals, also 3 layers that can be revealed in light and shadow, and also a connector of underground flows of surface and star. I should also point out before I read Mr. Stevens' fragment of his poem, that this star in the belt is not 1 star, it's 3 stars. From a distance, it looks like 1, but in 1969, with our telescopes, we were able to determine what looks like 1 star is actually 3 pulled out over millions of light years. I don't know how they knew that, Maybe it was the Datura on the site, which is straight DMT. I don't know, but it poses interesting proposition. So with this, I'd like to refer you to Mr. Wallace Stevens, one poet, also working at the bank in Connecticut. He has a great poem called 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. He goes through 13 different ways, conjugating verbs, breaking down the nouns. He's talking about the bird song. So this is to me very moving, I think, apropos. When the blackbird flew out of sight, it marked the edge of one of many circles. Now, this came up a lot today. Pareidolia, pareidolia, sorry, it's a mouthful. Okay, what does pareidolia mean? Well, it's something that keeps coming up. And it's nice to know that there's a word for it. We who wade into the area of investigation that we're in now, we always have to balance our concern for the seductive lineages of pareidolia, seeing visual patterns or meaning in random visual information and pursuing difficult truths. So now we go back to our computer scientist who reminded us that, hey, you can find patterns almost anywhere. It's true. The neuroscientist, Stuart Firestein, tells us that it is the process of not knowing, however, that is the true engine of science, and that research based on what we don't know is more valuable than building on what we do know. Don't bother the earth spirit. Don't bother the earth spirit who lives here. She's working on a story. It is the oldest story in the world, and it is delicate, changing. That's by a native poet, happens to be the 23rd poet laureate of the United States. She's from the Muscogee Nation. I think she's wonderful.